The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when Alexa packed her things. A pale light crept across the wooden floorboards of her tiny rented room above the general store, tracing the edges of a faded shawl, a torn letter, and the single pair of worn boots she owned. The letter lay open on the bed, its ink smudged from her thumb where she had read and reread the last cruel line, "Don't wait for me." That was all Samuel had written before he left town for good, taking with him the fragile hope she had nursed through every hard winter and whispered prayer. Now, all she had left was the road, and the promise she'd made herself to leave before the gossip could find new ways to hurt her. She folded the letter, tucked it deep in her pocket, and breathed out a trembling whisper. "I ain't staying. I'm too ugly to be loved." Downstairs, the storekeeper Mr. Gaines shouted for her to sweep before she left, his voice sharp as a rusty nail. The broom's bristles rasped against the floorboards while sunlight spilled through the dusty windows, catching on shelves of tinware and thread. A few customers drifted in, wives with baskets, a boy chasing a penny, and each one let their eyes linger just long enough to remind her of what they saw. The scar on her cheek, the uneven skin that ran from her jaw to her temple, the shy way she never met a man's gaze for long. Words followed her like flies. Poor thing. Strange one. Ugly girl. When Samuel had been kind to her once, it had felt like spring after too many winters. But kindness had turned to pity, and pity to shame. He'd stopped speaking to her in public months before he left. The last time she saw him, he'd looked through her like she was a ghost. Now she swept his memory into a pile of dust and pushed it out the door. By noon, the wind rose. It carried the smell of sagebrush and the dry rattle of faraway thunder. She tied her shawl tight, lifted her small bag, and stepped out into the street. The town of Willow Bend was fading behind her already, its wooden porches slanted with age, its church bell cracked, its people too tired to notice when someone disappeared. She didn't look back. The road ahead was pale and endless, a river of dust winding between the hills. She walked until her legs ached, until the sun dipped low and the clouds gathered heavy above the plain. Each step felt like pulling herself from quicksand, but there was relief in the movement, in leaving behind the weight of every whisper that had ever burned her ears. Then came the sound of hooves, a deep rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. She turned to see a rider coming from the east, tall and broad-shouldered, the brim of his hat cutting the evening light. The horse beneath him was black as river rock, its mane streaming in the wind. When he drew near, he slowed, reining the animal with quiet strength. "You're heading the wrong way," he said. His voice carried no judgment, just a fact delivered like a man stating the weather. Alexa looked up at him and saw lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes. Years of sun, years of silence. His coat was dusted white from the trail, his hands calloused but steady on the reins. She said nothing. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded toward the horizon where the clouds were thickening. "Storm's comin'. You'll need shelter." "I don't need any," she murmured, her voice hoarse from dust. He dismounted, walked a few steps closer, and pointed toward a cluster of trees barely visible in the distance. "My ranch is that way. Hollow Creek. You'll get soaked if you keep on." Something in his calmness unnerved her. He didn't stare at her scar, didn't look away either. He just waited. When the first drop of rain touched her cheek, she sighed and let him lead her to his horse. The ride was long, and the rain came heavy. She clung to the saddle's edge, trying not to think about the warmth of his back against her hands. He didn't speak, but the quiet between them felt solid, like two people carrying storms of their own. When they reached his ranch, the storm had turned the field silver. The house stood on a rise, fences crooked, barn leaning like an old friend who'd had too much whiskey. He helped her down, and she nearly stumbled. "Inside," he said, holding the door open. The fire inside the main room glowed faintly, the scent of pine smoke curling through the air. A gray-haired woman looked up from a rocking chair, old Ruth, the housekeeper, though Alexa didn't yet know her name. She frowned at the mud on Alexa's dress, but said nothing. The man hung his hat, nodded once, and disappeared into another room. For the first time in months, Alexa felt warmth that wasn't from the sun. She stood near the fire until her hands stopped trembling. By morning, she decided to stay just long enough for the rain to pass. But rain has a way of lingering on the plains, and so did she. Days turned into weeks. She helped Ruth with cooking and mending, fed the hens, and learned the slow rhythm of ranch life. Abram, the rancher, as she learned his name, kept to himself. He spoke little but always noticed when she was tired, when she'd missed a meal, when the wind blew cold through the windows, and she forgot to light a fire. He had the quiet kind of presence that filled a room without needing to speak. The others respected him, Ben the stable boy, the few ranch hands who came by for supplies, but they all whispered about his temper. The angry rancher, they called him. But Alexa never saw anger in him, only weariness, a heaviness behind the eyes that matched her own. One evening she brought him coffee as he repaired a broken fence post. The sunset bled crimson across the hills, turning everything to fire. He took the cup with a nod. "Thank you." She hesitated before speaking. "You could have left me on the road that day." He looked up at her, the faintest smile touching his lips. Didn't seem right. For a moment, the air between them softened. Then she turned away, unsure what to do with the warmth his words stirred inside her. Weeks later, that peace cracked. A group of ranch hands from town rode up to deliver supplies. Among them was Samuel. His laughter reached her before she saw his face, and when he did see her, his eyes widened with something cruel. "Well, look who's found herself a new home," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Didn't think the ugly girl would make herself useful out here." The words sliced through her like glass. The men laughed. Ruth froze at the kitchen window. Ben looked away. Only Abram moved. He crossed the yard in 3 slow steps, his boots sinking in the mud. His voice, when it came, was low, dangerous. "You call her that again, you'll find your teeth in the dirt." Samuel tried to laugh it off, but the sound faltered when he saw Abram's eyes. There was no bluff in them, only a stillness that made the air heavy. The men muttered excuses, loaded their supplies, and rode off without another word. Alexa stood frozen by the fence, her heart hammering. Shame and gratitude tangled in her chest until she couldn't breathe. She ran inside before anyone could see her tears. That night the storm returned. Thunder rolled through the valley, and rain lashed the windows. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her shawl, her reflection flickering in the lamp's weak glow. Her face looked small, almost childlike. She whispered again, "I told you I ain't staying." She meant it this time. But when she opened her door to leave, she saw light spilling from the main room. Abram was sitting by the fire, bottle beside him, eyes lost in the flames. His shirt was still damp from rain, his hair uncombed. "I'll be gone by morning," she said softly. He didn't move. "You keep saying that," he answered, voice rough, like it's something to be proud of. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. He rose slowly, every motion deliberate. The firelight carved shadows across his face. "You think you ain't worth staying for, Alexa. But you've been the only good thing in this house for months. You patch what's broken. You listen when no one does. You carry more hurt than most men could stand, and still you smile at the sunrise." Her breath caught. The rain outside grew louder, drowning the world. He stepped closer. "You say you're ugly, but I've seen ugly. In men's hearts, in the way they talk, in what they take from others. That ain't you." His voice softened until it trembled. "You're pretty, Alexa." The words fell between them like a prayer. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Her throat tightened. Tears rose before she could stop them. No one had ever said that without pity or jest. She shook her head. "You don't mean that." He reached out, brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, his touch hesitant. "I do." The moment stretched thin, fragile as glass. Then something in her broke, not the kind of break that destroys, but the kind that lets the light in. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "No one's ever said that to me before." "Then let me be the first," he murmured, "and not the last." The storm roared outside, wind battering the shutters, but inside the world had gone still. She pressed her forehead against his chest, felt the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his hand at her back. For the first time in her life, She didn't feel invisible. By dawn, the rain eased. The light that spilled through the window was soft, golden, and new. She stood on the porch wrapped in her shawl, watching the hills shimmer with dew. Behind her, Abram stepped out silent, a coffee cup in hand. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was full enough. And somewhere in the gentle hum of morning, the world whispered a truth she would never forget. Sometimes it takes an angry man to learn gentleness, and a woman who thought herself unloved to teach him what love really means.